The land office in Wren's Crossing had one window facing the street, and Sela's Prout was drawing its shade down with trembling fingers when the first fist struck the door hard enough to rattle the glass in its frame. "Open up, Prout. We know you are in there." The voice belonged to Ike Cobb, foreman of the Blackwood cattle operation, and behind him stood 4 more men with rifles held loose and easy, the way men hold rifles when they expect no one will stop them. Inside, Beatrice Whittaker had been bent over the county's water claim ledger for the better part of an hour, tracing her father's name across a page gone brittle with age, when the pounding began. She looked up at Prout, whose face had gone the color of ash. "They are here for the record," she said quietly. It was not a question. "They are here for the record," Prout agreed, and his voice cracked on the last word. "Miss Whittaker, you had better go out the back." "I will not." She closed the ledger but kept her hand flat upon its cover as though she could hold the pages shut through will alone. "This book is county property, and I have every right to be reading it." The door gave under a boot heel before Prout could argue further, and Ike Cobb stepped through with the calm of a man who had broken doors before and paid no price for it. Behind him came Deacon Toll and 3 others, all wearing the Blackwood brand stitched into their vests as though it were a badge of its own. "Evening, Prout," Cobb said. "Colonel Blackwood requires the water claim ledger, the page concerning Willow Spring specifically. There has been some confusion about the boundaries, and the colonel would like it settled quiet, without lawyers." "That ledger does not leave this office," Prout said, though he had backed himself against the filing cabinets. Cobb's gaze slid past him to Beatrice Whittaker, standing straight-backed at the counter with the ledger still beneath her palm. "And who is this?" "Beatrice Whittaker," she answered before Prout could speak for her. "Elias Whittaker's daughter. I have come to see my father's claim recorded honestly, and I intend to keep seeing it until it is." Something in Cobb's face shifted, a recognition. "The newspaper woman. A newspaper woman, yes. Then you will understand it is nothing personal when I take that book from you." He crossed the room in 3 strides and reached for the ledger. Beatrice did not let go of it, and for one terrible moment they were both gripping the same leather spine, her knuckles white, his patience visibly thinning, when the door that Cobb had already broken swung wider still, and a man filled the frame with a shotgun leveled low across his forearm. "Ike Cobb," Warren Lawson said, "you are going to want to let go of that book before I decide you are robbing a county office, because that is exactly what it will look like written up in tomorrow's report." He had come in off the evening stage run, still in his driving coat with the dust of the Cathlo Road on his boots, and he had heard the shouting from 2 doors down and left his team standing in their traces to come find out why. The badge on his vest, small and tarnished from years of Cascade weather, caught the last of the sunset through the doorway. Cobb did not let go of the ledger, not right away. "This is Blackwood business, Lawson, county business. You have got no cause here." "I have got a badge and eyes," Warren said. "That is cause enough where I come from." He thumbed back the shotgun's hammer, not aiming it at any man's chest but making certain every one of them heard the click. "Let the lady have her book, Ike. Whatever the colonel wants settled, he can settle it in the daylight in front of the judge, same as anyone else in this county." For a long breath nothing moved. Then Cobb released the ledger, and Beatrice staggered back half a step with the sudden slack of it, catching herself against the counter. Cobb straightened his vest as though the whole encounter had been beneath him. "You will regret this, deputy," he said. "The colonel does not forget who stands in his way." "Neither do I," Warren answered evenly, and did not lower the shotgun until the 5 men had filed out into the darkening street, and their horses had carried them off toward the Blackwood spread. Only then did he look properly at the woman he had just defended. She was younger than he had guessed from her voice, perhaps 27, dark-haired and travel-worn, with ink stains on 2 fingers of her right hand, and an expression that suggested she had been more angry than frightened through the entire ordeal. "Thank you," she said, "though I confess I would have managed." "I do not doubt it," he said, and found himself almost smiling despite the night's trouble. "You had a grip on that book like it owed you money." "It very well might," she said. "It has my father's name in it, and men who would rather it did not." Sela's Prout, still pale, was already reaching for the door to bar it properly. "Miss Whittaker, Mr. Lawson, I think it best we lock up for the night and speak no more of ledgers until morning." Warren nodded slowly, but his eyes stayed on Beatrice Whittaker a moment longer than duty required, and something in him understood, even then, that the trouble walking out of that office was not finished walking in. The summons came 3 days later, delivered not by Ryder but by the sheriff himself, Dade Cutter filling the doorway of the Lawson stage office with his hat in his hand in a gesture of false humility that fooled no one who knew him. "Warren," Cutter said, "I am going to need that badge back." Warren set down the harness strap he had been mending. "On whose word?" "On the word of the county commission, which includes Colonel Blackwood, who has filed a complaint that you drew a weapon on his men while they were conducting lawful business." "Lawful business," Warren repeated. "Breaking a door and trying to steal county property is lawful business now." "It is his word against theirs, and theirs is 4 men to your 1 plus Prout, who is too frightened of Blackwood to say much of anything useful, and a newspaper woman nobody in this county much wants to hear from anyway." Cutter's jaw tightened. "I am sorry for it, Warren. I truly am. Your father wore that badge before you, and I never had cause to regret pinning it back on you. But the commission wants it, and I answer to the commission same as you answered to me." Warren stood, and for a moment the office was very quiet, filled only with the smell of leather and the far-off whistle of a logging donkey engine somewhere up the valley. He unpinned the badge slowly, the small brass star that had ridden over his heart for 6 years, since he was 26 years old and freshly returned from burying his father, and he set it into Cutter's open palm. "You tell the commission," Warren said, "that I would draw on Ike Cobb again tomorrow, badge or no badge, if I caught him stealing from a woman who has done nothing but ask honest questions." Cutter closed his fist around the star. "That is exactly what worries me about you, son." Word traveled fast in a town the size of Wren's Crossing, faster still in a drought year when every man was short-tempered from dust and low creeks, and the constant fear of fire in timber gone dry as kindling. By the end of that week, the story had grown legs of its own. That the newspaper woman had come to stir up trouble about water rights that were none of her business, that she had gotten an honest deputy stripped of his badge, that decent families ought not rent her a room nor sell her a meal until she took herself back to wherever she had come from. Beatrice heard the whispers everywhere she went, in the mercantile where the clerk suddenly discovered he was out of writing paper the moment she asked for some, in the boarding house where her landlady, Mrs. Iverson, apologized with real regret in her eyes and said she could not keep renting the room past the week, not with the talk going around. She heard it loudest at the feed store, where 2 men she did not know discussed, apparently for her benefit, how certain troublesome women ought to be shown the road out of a decent county before they caused real harm. She did not run. She had not run from harder things than gossip, and she told herself so each night by lamplight in her rented room, writing longhand in a notebook already half full of names and dates, and the small, damning inconsistencies she had found buried in 3 months of county records across 2 counties. But she was honest enough with herself to admit, alone in the dark, that she was frightened, and that the fear had teeth. It was Warren Lawson who found her on the boarding house porch the evening Mrs. Iverson gave her the week's notice, sitting with her notebook closed in her lap, and her eyes fixed on the dry hills gone gold and brittle in the last light. "I heard they are putting you out," he said, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps, hat in hand. "News travels efficiently in this county," she said. "Faster than water, certainly, which seems to be the one thing in short supply." He almost smiled at that. "I have got a stage leaving for Tacoma Thursday if you have had enough of Wren's Crossing." "I have not," she said, and something in her voice made him go still. "I have had enough of being lied to, Mr. Lawson, and enough of watching men like Ike Cobb walk free while a woman who asks questions gets run out on a rail. But I have not had enough of Wren's Crossing. Not yet." He climbed the porch steps and sat on the rail across from her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his face, the particular tiredness of a man who had lost something that mattered and was still deciding how to carry the loss. "I am sorry about your badge," she said. "You should not have lost it defending me." "I would not call it lost," he said. "I would call it spent. There is a difference. A thing you lose, you were not paying attention when it left you. This I handed over with my own hand, knowing exactly what it cost. That is a generous way to see it. It is the only way I know how to see it and still sleep at night." He turned his hat over once in his hands. "Tell me something, Miss Whittaker. What is it you are chasing so hard that you would let this whole county turn against you rather than let it go?" She was quiet a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice had lost its sharp edges. "My father filed a claim on Willow Spring 9 years ago. It is a poor claim by most measures, 160 acres of rock and pine, but the spring itself never runs dry, not even in a summer like this one. He built a cabin there and a fence, and he believed, the way men believe when they have put their whole lives into a piece of ground, that it would be his until he died." She looked out at the hills. 2 years ago the county recorder told him his filing had never been properly registered, that the paperwork showed a gap, an error, and that the claim had reverted to the county and been resold. He fought it for 8 months. He wrote letters to the territorial office. He rode to Olympia twice. And then his heart gave out one morning while he was mending that same fence, still believing the land was his to mend. Her hands had gone tight around the closed notebook. "I have been a newspaper reporter in Tacoma for 4 years, Mr. Lawson. I know how to read a ledger, and I know when a paper trail has been altered by a careful hand rather than worn by honest age. My father's filing was not lost. It was erased, and I intend to prove it before I leave this county, whatever the cost." Warren was quiet for a long moment, turning something over behind his eyes. "Willow Spring," he said finally. "That is the relay station water for my north route. Has been for 6 years since my father built the line. I lease that water from whoever holds the claim, and for the last 2 years I have been paying that lease to Colonel Ezra Blackwood." They looked at each other then with the particular stillness of two people who have just discovered they have been standing, unknowingly, on the same ground the whole time. "Then it seems," Beatrice said slowly, "that we may have more in common than either of us realized, Mr. Lawson." "It seems we might," he agreed, "and I would take it as a kindness if you would call me Warren. Mr. Lawson makes me feel like my father, and he has been gone 6 years." "Warren," she said, testing the name, and found she did not dislike the shape of it in her mouth. "Then you must call me Beatrice." The following morning, before the heat had fully claimed the day, Warren brought his buggy around to the boarding house and found Beatrice already on the porch with a canvas satchel of papers and a clear-eyed determination that made him glad, not for the first time, that he had come looking for her the evening before. "Elk Fork," he said, helping her up onto the seat. "That is where we start if you want the truth about that ledger. There is a settlement up the valley, a day's ride, mostly homestead families who have been fighting Blackwood over grazing rights since before your father ever filed his claim. If anyone has seen this pattern before, it will be them. You know them well." "Well enough. I run mail up that way twice a month when the road allows it. Agnes Lindqvist keeps the store there, and she has got no love for Blackwood or anyone wearing his brand." The road north out of Wren's Crossing climbed steadily into timber country, the ruts baked hard as brick from 3 rainless months, dust rising in a pale wake behind the buggy wheels. Warren drove with the easy competence of a man who had learned every switchback and washout of this country as a boy, and Beatrice found herself watching his hands on the reins more than she watched the scenery, though the scenery was considerable. Dry meadows gone the color of wheat, stands of Douglas fir standing dark and thirsty against a sky bleached nearly white with heat, and far off, the blue shoulders of the Cascades holding what little snow remained of a poor winter. They had gone perhaps 8 miles when Warren slowed the team without being asked, and Beatrice heard it too. hoofbeats coming fast from a stand of trees ahead, where the road bent around a shoulder of rock. "Get down low," Warren said, already reaching for the shotgun stowed beneath the seat. 4 riders came out of the trees in a spread that left no doubt of their intent, Ike Cobb at their center on a big roan gelding. He held up a hand and the others fanned out across the road, blocking it entirely. "Turning around would be the wise thing, Lawson," Cobb called. "This road is closed today. Colonel's orders. Some kind of survey work up ahead." "Funny," Warren said, not slowing the team further but not advancing either. "I did not hear about any survey, and I know most everything that happens on my own route." "Well, now you know." Cobb's eyes cut to Beatrice. "Take the lady back to town, deputy." "Oh, that is right. You are not a deputy anymore, are you? Doesn't take a badge to see 4 men blocking a public road for no lawful reason," Warren said. "That is a crime with or without my star, Ike." Cobb's smile did not reach his eyes. "Then I suppose you had better go report it to Sheriff Cutter." For a moment neither side moved. The tension stretched taut as a fence wire, and Beatrice felt her heart hammering though she kept her face composed, the way she had trained herself to do in 4 years of asking hard questions of dangerous men. Then Warren did something she did not expect. He laughed, short and easy, and turned the team off the road entirely, angling down a barely visible track through the trees that ran along a dry creek bed. "There is an old log road runs parallel to this stretch," he said quietly, once they had put a stand of timber between themselves and Cobb's men. "My father used it hauling shingle bolts before the county road was graded. Rougher going, but it comes out above the ferry crossing at Widow's Bend, and from there it is a straight run to Elk Fork. You are not going to fight them. 4 rifles against 1 shotgun and a lady I would very much like to keep unharmed. No, Beatrice. Best fight I know how to pick is the one where I am already 3 miles gone before the other man notices I have left." She found herself laughing despite the fear still humming in her chest, and he glanced sideways at her with something like relief in his expression, as though her laughter had confirmed some private hope of his. The log road was every bit as rough as promised, jolting them over roots and washed stone for the better part of an hour, but it delivered them, as he had said it would, to the bank of the Cathlo River above a wide slow bend where a cable ferry waited, its flat deck resting against the near shore, operated by an old Norwegian named Torvald who greeted Warren with the easy familiarity of long acquaintance. "Trouble on the main road?" Torvald asked, already working the windlass to draw the ferry across. "Ike Cobb playing at surveyor," Warren said. Torvald spat into the low water. "That man has never surveyed anything in his life except which pocket to pick next." He looked at Beatrice with open curiosity. "You would be the newspaper lady everyone is so worked up about." "I would be," Beatrice said. "Good," Torvald said simply, and hauled the ferry the rest of the way across without further comment, which Beatrice found more reassuring than any long speech of support could have been. Elk Fork revealed itself gradually as the road climbed out of the river valley, a scattering of cabins and 1 long low building that served as store and gathering hall both, set in a bowl of meadow ringed by timber that had, Beatrice noted, a great deal more green left in it than the country around Wren's Crossing, thanks to a network of hand-dug irrigation ditches fed by a creek that ran, Warren explained, from the same watershed as Willow Spring. Agnes Lindqvist met them at the store's door before they had fully climbed down from the buggy, a broad-shouldered woman with pale braided hair going gray and eyes that missed nothing. "Warren Lawson," she said, "and I am guessing this is the newspaper woman the whole county cannot stop talking about." "Beatrice Whittaker," Beatrice said, extending her hand. Agnes shook it firmly. "Come inside. There is coffee, and I think you 2 have not eaten since sunrise, judging by how you are both squinting at my biscuits." Over a meal of biscuits and dried venison stew, with the day's heat finally softening toward evening, Agnes told them what she knew, and what she knew turned Beatrice's blood cold. 3 weeks back," Agnes said, "somebody drove near 60 head of cattle through our upper pasture in the dead of night, trampled 2 of our irrigation ditches doing it, and left a fair number of strays behind wearing Blackwood's own brand, half-starved and limping like they had been pushed hard for days. Next morning, Ike Cobb rides up bold as you please, saying his cattle had been stolen and driven this direction and wanting to search every barn in Elk Fork. Did he find anything? Warren asked. He found his own strays, exactly where he wanted them found, and made a great show of it in front of witnesses he had brought along for the purpose. Now there is talk in the county paper, the one Blackwood's brother-in-law runs, about cattle thieves operating out of Elk Fork, and a petition going around asking the sheriff to clear this valley of, and I am quoting the petition directly, undesirable squatters. Beatrice had already pulled out her notebook. You believe the cattle were driven here deliberately. I know it, Agnes said flatly. I have raised cattle 30 years, Miss Whittaker. Animals driven hard through unfamiliar country in the dark do not wander calmly into a strange pasture and stand there waiting to be found. Somebody herded them here on purpose and left them like a hunter leaves bait. Why frame Elk Fork specifically? Agnes's mouth thinned. Because this creek waters 22 families, and every one of those families holds their claim through the same original survey as your father's, Miss Whittaker, filed the same year by the same land office. If they can call us thieves and get the sheriff to run us off, they clear this entire watershed for the colonel's herds, and they set the precedent that makes taking your Willow Spring claim look like simple, tidy business instead of theft. Beatrice's pen had gone still on the page. She looked at Warren and found him already watching her, the same understanding dawning in his face that she felt taking shape in her own chest. They were not looking at 2 separate injustices, hers and Elk Fork's, but at one single design, patient and thorough, with Colonel Ezra Blackwood's careful hand behind every piece of it. We are not rivals for this water at all, are we? Warren said quietly. We never were. We have just been fighting the same man from 2 different directions. It would seem not, Beatrice said, and something in her chest, some old defended place, eased for the first time since she had ridden into Wren's Crossing 3 weeks before. They stayed the night in Elk Fork, Beatrice given a small room off the store while Warren bedded down in the hayloft above the mule shed. And in the gray hour before dawn, Beatrice walked out to the upper pasture Agnes had described and found, exactly where the older woman had said she would. The churned mud of a driven herd, now dried hard, and the faint remains of a boot print far too fine and eastern cut to belong to any homesteader in Elk Fork. She was on her knees, measuring the print against her own hand when Warren found her there, his breath visible in the surprising chill of the mountain morning. You should not be out here alone, he said, though there was no scold in it, only concern. I could say the same of you, she answered, not looking up. Come see this. He crouched beside her close enough that she caught the smell of wood smoke and horse and something warmer beneath it that she did not examine too closely, and together they studied the print in the cracked earth. City boot, he said. Custom heel by the wear pattern. That is not a cowhand's boot. No, she agreed. That is a boot that has walked county office floors far more often than it has walked cattle trails. She looked at him. Ike Cobb did not plan this alone, Warren. Somebody with access to land office paperwork is behind the design of it, even if Cobb's hands did the driving. Aldous Finch, Warren said slowly, the land commissioner. He would have handled the original survey filings for both Elk Fork and your father's claim. Then that is where we go next, Beatrice said, rising and brushing dust from her skirt with the brisk efficiency of a woman already 3 steps ahead in her mind. Though I suspect Mr. Finch will not welcome us with biscuits and coffee. They rode back down toward Wren's Crossing 2 days later, having spent the interval gathering sworn statements from Elk Fork families willing to put their names to what they had seen and suspected. A bundle of testimony that Beatrice guarded in her satchel as though it were made of gold rather than paper. They took the main road this time, reasoning that a show of confidence might serve them better than another dash through the timber. But confidence proved a poor shield when they reached the trestle bridge above Cutter Creek and found it blocked by a felled fir tree, its trunk still weeping sap, cut down deliberately across the narrow span. "That was not lightning," Warren said grimly, pulling the team to a halt. "No," Beatrice agreed, already scanning the timber on either side of the road, and it was her sharp eyes that caught the movement first, a glint of a rifle barrel among the ferns above the cut bank. "Down," she said, and Warren did not question her, hauling her from the buggy seat into the ditch beside the road, a bare instant before a shot cracked out and splintered the buggy's side panel where her shoulder had been a heartbeat before. They lay pressed together in the dry ditch, dust and pine needles in their hair, Warren's arm thrown protectively across her back, both of them breathing hard. "Well," Beatrice said into the silence that followed, her voice remarkably steady, "I do not believe that was Mr. Cobb's idea of a friendly conversation." "No," Warren agreed, a note of something almost like admiration in his voice despite the danger. "You have got good ears, Beatrice Whittaker. I have got good reasons to keep them sharp. 4 years in Tacoma taught me that men who mean you well rarely creep through the underbrush to say so." They waited tense, but no second shot came, only the distant sound of a horse being ridden hard away through the timber, as though the shooter had meant only to frighten, not to press the matter further with two people now alert and armed. "A warning," Warren said, once he judged it safe enough to sit up. "If they had meant to kill us outright, they would have come down and finished it." "A warning from whom, though? Cobb or Finch or the Colonel himself? Does it matter? They are all pulling the same rope." He helped her to her feet and did not immediately release her hand once she was standing, and she did not immediately pull it away. "We cannot clear that tree ourselves, not with just the two of us and no proper tools. We will have to leave the buggy and walk the log road back down to Torvald's Ferry. It is a longer way around, but it is the only way I trust right now." The walk took the better part of 3 hours, down through timber gone tinder-dry and silent with the particular held-breath quiet of a drought summer, and somewhere in that long walk, tired and shaken and still carrying the weight of what they had nearly lost, Warren reached over and took her satchel from her shoulder without asking, settling its weight onto his own, and Beatrice let him, understanding it for what it was. Not a man deciding she could not carry her own burden, but a man wanting simply to carry some part of it with her. "Your father," she said as they walked, "the one whose stage line you inherited, what happened to him?" Warren was quiet a moment before answering. "Raiders hit our North Relay Station 8 years back, wanting the fresh horses more than anything. My father tried to talk them down instead of shooting, always believed talk solved more than powder did. They shot him anyway for his trouble and took the horses regardless. He looked at the road ahead. I was 24. Buried him, took over the line, and when old Sheriff Voss offered me a deputy's star 2 years later, I took that too, because I decided I would rather be the kind of man who could stop the next raid than the kind who only mourned after. And now that star is gone." "Now that star is gone," he agreed, "but I find I do not regret how it left me nearly as much as I thought I would 3 weeks ago." He glanced at her, and there was something unguarded in his face that made her breath catch, just slightly. "It bought something worth having, I think." She did not answer that directly, but she did not look away either, and they walked the rest of the way to the ferry with their hands not quite touching but never far apart. The town meeting had been called for the following Thursday evening, ostensibly to discuss county water allocation during the drought, but everyone in Wren's Crossing understood it for what it truly was the moment Colonel Ezra Blackwood rose to address the packed hall, his silver-topped cane tapping once against the floorboards for attention. "Neighbors," he began, in the warm, reasonable tone of a man accustomed to being believed, "we find ourselves in a difficult season. Water is scarce, tempers are short, and I am afraid certain outside influences have taken advantage of our troubles to spread discord where there ought to be unity." His gaze found Beatrice, seated near the back beside Warren and held there. "I refer, of course, to Miss Whittaker, whose newspaper articles have accused respectable men of this county of theft and fraud, based on nothing more than a daughter's grief and an outsider's ignorance of how frontier land claims are properly settled. A murmur ran through the hall, some sympathetic to Beatrice, more not. Blackwood pressed his advantage. "I have nothing but sympathy for a woman who lost her father," he continued. "But sympathy cannot excuse slander, nor can it excuse the reckless endangerment this woman has brought upon good families in Elk Fork by encouraging them to defy lawful authority. I say it plainly, neighbors, because someone must. This county would be better served and safer if Miss Whittaker returned to Tacoma and left our affairs to those who understand them." Beatrice rose before the applause that followed had fully died. "May I answer the Colonel's charges, since he has been so generous as to name me directly?" Sheriff Cutter, presiding uneasily at the front, hesitated, then nodded, unable to find a graceful way to refuse in front of so many witnesses. "I have not accused any man of anything I cannot support with sworn testimony and documents," Beatrice said, her voice carrying clear and steady through the hall despite the hostile faces turned toward her. "I have a written record of my father's original filing on Willow Spring, witnessed and dated, which the county recorder's office now claims never existed. I have sworn statements from 22 families in Elk Fork describing cattle driven onto their land in the dead of night by riders none of them recognized, cattle that happened to wear the Colonel's own brand. I have a boot print, measured and sketched, belonging to a man in fine Eastern boots who had no business walking a mountain pasture at midnight unless he was there to plant evidence rather than find it. She let that settle over the room. I did not come to this county to make trouble, neighbors. I came to find out why my father died believing he had been robbed of everything he built. I am beginning to understand that I am not the only daughter or son or widow in this county who could ask that same question." For a moment the hall was silent, and Beatrice allowed herself to hope the tide might turn. Then a man near the front, Harlan Griggs, who Beatrice would later learn held a substantial debt to Blackwood's bank, stood and pointed a shaking finger. "She is trying to turn honest folk against the men who built this county. I say we vote her out, same as we would any troublemaker." The hall erupted into competing shouts, and Beatrice felt the crowd's mood curdle from uncertain to ugly in the space of a few heartbeats, men rising, voices rising with them, until it seemed the meeting might spill directly into the street with her at its center. It was Warren who stood then, stepping into the aisle beside her, no badge on his vest but his voice carrying the same authority it always had. "Before any of you decide to run a woman out of town on a rumor," he said, loud enough to cut through the noise, "I would ask you to remember that I stood in that land office and saw Ike Cobb try to steal that ledger with my own eyes before Miss Whittaker had said one public word against anybody. I lost my badge that same week for the crime of stopping a robbery. Ask yourselves why a man would be punished for that unless somebody powerful wanted that ledger taken quietly and wanted anyone who stopped it removed." Cutter's face had gone red. "Warren, that is not the business of this meeting." "It is exactly the business of this meeting," Warren said, "since the Colonel has made Miss Whittaker's character the business of this meeting. I will not stand by and watch this town run out an honest woman to protect a dishonest man, and I do not much care whether that costs me anything further than it has already cost me." The hall did not calm entirely, and shouted arguments continued in pockets throughout the crowd, but the tide of the room shifted enough that no formal vote was called that night, and Beatrice left the hall with Warren's hand steady at her elbow, guiding her through a crowd that parted for them with more uncertainty than open hostility now. Outside in the cool dark of the street she turned to him. "You did not have to do that. You have already given up so much." "I have given up a badge," he said. "I have not given up my sense of what is right, and I do not intend to start now." He studied her face in the lamplight spilling from the hall's windows. "Besides, Beatrice, I find I would rather stand beside you in a room full of angry men than sit safely at home wondering if you were still standing at all." She looked up at him for a long moment, close enough now that she could see the small scar above his left eyebrow, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into mountain sun and driving rain. "That," she said softly, "is a dangerously kind thing to say to a woman half this county wants gone." "I have never much cared what this county wants," he said. "Only what is true." The discovery that broke the case open came 4 days later, and it came not from careful investigation but from Silas Pruitt's guilty conscience finally overtaking his fear. He came to the boarding house after dark, where Mrs. Iverson, moved by Warren's speech at the town meeting, had quietly reversed her notice and allowed Beatrice to stay on, and he brought with him a single folded paper that he pressed into Beatrice's hands with trembling urgency. "I should have shown you this the first night," he said. "I was afraid, Miss Whittaker, and I am ashamed of it, but I cannot carry it any longer." The paper was a letter, in a careful, cramped hand, from Land Commissioner Aldous Finch to Sheriff Dade Cutter, dated some 8 months prior, discussing arrangements for reassigning the Whittaker filing, once the recorder's copy has been suitably amended, and referencing a payment of $400 already received from the Colonel's account for services rendered in the matter. It was not by itself an outright confession, but it was proof beyond any reasonable doubt that Cutter had known of the fraud from its very beginning, that Finch had executed it, and that Blackwood had paid for it. Beatrice sat very still, reading the letter twice, 3 times, while Warren watched her face for some sign of what it meant. "Cutter," she said finally, quietly, "the sheriff himself. Warren, this changes everything. This is not simply Blackwood and a corrupt clerk. The law itself, the entire office meant to protect this county, has been bought." Warren took the letter from her hands and read it himself, his jaw tightening with every line. "This is why they took my badge so fast," he said. "It was never really about Ike Cobb and a broken door. Cutter needed me gone before I started asking the kind of questions that would lead here." "There is more," Pruitt said miserably. "I overheard the Colonel speaking with Finch 2 days ago. They mean to hold the eviction hearing for Elk Fork within the week, before the circuit judge leaves the territory for the winter session in Olympia. If the families are ruled cattle thieves and removed before Judge Marsh ever sees your evidence, Miss Whittaker, there will be no one left to testify to the truth of it, and no claim left for you to fight for either, because Blackwood means to have the Willow Spring transfer finalized the same week, using the eviction as cover." "When does Judge Marsh arrive?" Beatrice asked. "He is expected in Wren's Crossing on the 28th, Pruitt said. 3 days before the hearing Blackwood has arranged. But Miss Whittaker, the mountain weather has turned early this year. There was snow reported on the high pass 2 days past, and if it holds, the regular mail route may be closed before the judge's circuit rider can bring word of any change in schedule." Warren looked up sharply. "The high pass? That is the only route to Elk Fork fast enough to get Agnes Lindquist and her witnesses down here in time for the hearing, if the main road stays blocked by Blackwood's men." "There is something else," Pruitt added, quieter now. "Word came by wire yesterday that young Peter Lindquist has taken a fever, a bad one, the kind the doctor up there cannot treat without proper medicine, quinine, and the fever powders Dr. Hale keeps here in town. Agnes sent a rider down 2 days ago asking for help, but with the weather turning, no one has been willing to attempt the crossing." Beatrice felt the weight of all of it settle over her at once. A sick child, a corrupt sheriff, a hearing that could not wait, and a mountain pass closing itself against them with every hour that passed. She looked at Warren and found him already reaching for his coat. "You know that road better than any man alive," she said. "I know it well enough to be afraid of it in a blizzard," he said honestly. "But I know it, and that is more than any other driver in this county can claim." He met her eyes. "I am taking medicine up to Elk Fork tonight," Beatrice, storm or no storm, because that boy will not survive waiting for it to pass. And I mean to bring Agnes and whichever families are willing back down with me, along with every scrap of testimony they can carry, so we reach Judge Marsh before Blackwood's hearing closes the door on all of it. Then I am coming with you. Beatrice, it is going to be a hard crossing, maybe the hardest I have made. I have the sworn statements in my satchel, Warren, and I know which pages of testimony matter most if we are questioned along the way. More than that, she said, and her voice softened, I'm not going to sit in this town wondering whether you made it through a blizzard alone when I could be beside you instead. He studied her for a long moment, and whatever he saw in her face settled the matter more surely than any argument could have. Then dress warm, he said, and say a prayer if you have one handy. We are going to need it. They left Wren's Crossing an hour before midnight. Warren driving a light sled he kept for exactly this kind of weather. Drawn by two sturdy mountain-bred horses he trusted more than any others in his stable. With medicine wrapped in oilcloth and packed deep in a chest at their feet alongside blankets, a lantern, and the satchel of testimony Beatrice would not let out of her reach. Dr. Hale had given careful instructions along with the quinine and fever powders, and pressed Warren's hand hard before they left, saying only, "That boy does not have more than 2 days left in him without this. Ride safe and ride fast." The first few miles were merely cold, the sky above them still clear enough to show a hard scatter of stars, but as they climbed toward the pass the wind began to rise, and within 2 hours the snow came with it, first in scattered flakes, and then in a driving curtain that swallowed the lantern light within arm's reach and turned the road ahead into a featureless white absence. "Warren," Beatrice said, her voice tight with the effort of keeping calm, "I cannot see the road at all." "Neither can I," he admitted, "but I can feel it. There is a rise here that has been rise long before this snow ever fell, and the horses know it as well as I do." He kept the team moving at a careful, steady pace, his whole body attuned to subtle shifts beneath the sled's runners that told him more than his eyes could. "Talk to me, Beatrice. Keep talking. It helps me stay awake to the road, and it will help you stay warm besides." So she talked, haltingly at first and then with growing warmth, telling him of her mother, who had died when Beatrice was 12, of the newsroom in Tacoma where she had fought for 4 years to be taken seriously among men who thought a woman's proper subject was recipes and church socials, of the particular fierce joy she had found the first time an editor printed her name beneath a story that mattered. He listened, and when the wind allowed, he told her of his own boyhood on this route, of learning to drive a team at 14 sitting on his father's knee, of the year a black bear had wandered into their relay station's yard and eaten an entire week's supply of oats before anyone worked up the courage to chase it off. Somewhere past the second hour, the cold became a thing Beatrice could not talk her way past, and she found herself shaking despite the blankets piled around her. "Come here," Warren said, and without further ceremony he shifted the reins to one hand and drew her against his side beneath the shared weight of a heavy buffalo robe, his arms settling around her shoulders with a warmth that had nothing false or forward in it, only necessity and care. "Better, better," she admitted, and let herself lean into him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat through his coat, more reassuring in that moment than any fire could have been. They reached the old line shack at the pass's summit near 2 in the morning, both of them numb with cold, the horses blowing hard and coated in ice, and Warren made the decision without discussion, turning the team off the road toward the low, dark shape of the shelter. "We cannot press on blind in this," he said. "We will lose the road entirely and lose ourselves with it. We rest the horses an hour, warm ourselves, and go on when the wind eases even a little." Inside, the shack held a small iron stove and a stack of dry wood left by some previous traveler's foresight, and within minutes, Warren had a fire crackling that filled the small space with blessed warmth. They sat close beside it, wrapped still in the buffalo robe, listening to the wind howl against the shack's timber walls, and Beatrice found herself studying his profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the careful, patient way he tended the small flame as though it too were something precious in his charge. "Do you think we will make it in time?" she asked. "For the boy, I mean, and for the hearing after." "I think," Warren said slowly, "that I have never wanted to make a crossing more in my life, and I have made a great many." He turned to look at her, firelight catching gold in his eyes. "I think also that whatever happens on that road tomorrow, I am glad it is you beside me and not some other passenger, Beatrice. I do not know when that became true, but I know it is true now, plain as anything I have ever known. Warren," her voice had gone soft, uncertain in a way it rarely was, "I came to this county looking only for justice for my father. I did not expect to find anything else worth keeping here. And have you found something else worth keeping?" She did not answer with words. She leaned across the small distance between them instead, and he met her halfway, and the kiss that followed was slow and careful at first, as though each of them were asking permission with every second that passed, and then deepened into something neither of them wished to end, the wind screaming outside forgotten entirely in the warmth of the small shack and the fire and each other. When at last they drew apart, Warren rested his forehead against hers, his breath unsteady. "I have been wanting to do that since a ledger office 3 weeks ago," he admitted, "though I did not let myself know it until just now." "I suspected as much," Beatrice said, a smile breaking through despite the exhaustion and cold. "Somewhere around the second time you looked at me like I had personally invented courage." "You very nearly had," he said, and kissed her again, briefer this time but no less certain, before reluctantly pulling back to check the fire and the small window for any sign of the storm easing. "We should rest what we can. An hour, no more. That boy is waiting on us, and so is Judge Marsh's hearing, whether the sky wishes to cooperate or not." They pressed on before dawn, the storm having eased to a manageable, steady snow rather than the blinding fury of the night before, and reached Elk Fork by mid-morning to find Agnes Lindqvist standing in her doorway with an expression of such raw relief at the sight of the sled that Beatrice's throat tightened just watching it. "Thank God," Agnes said, already reaching for the medicine chest. "Thank God, and thank you both." Dr. Hale's fever powders and quinine, administered within the hour, began their work by evening, and by the following morning young Peter Lindqvist's fever had broken enough that his mother wept openly with relief at his bedside, gripping Beatrice's hand so tightly it left marks. "We cannot thank you properly," Agnes said, "but we can do this. Every family in this valley willing to speak the truth before that judge. We will come, storm or no storm, and we will bring proof enough to bury Blackwood's lies for good." They made the return journey 2 days later, the weather having settled into ordinary hard winter rather than blizzard, a small caravan now, Warren's sled leading, followed by 3 wagons carrying Agnes and a dozen witnesses from Elk Fork, all bundled against the cold, all carrying in their memories and their few written records the truth Blackwood had tried so hard to bury. Judge Everett Marsh proved to be a lean, careful man of perhaps 60, with sharp eyes that missed little and a reputation, Warren had assured Beatrice, for caring far more about evidence than about the social standing of the men who appeared before him. He convened the hearing in the same hall where Blackwood had tried to run Beatrice out of town not 2 weeks before, and this time the hall was fuller still, word having spread of the approaching confrontation. Colonel Ezra Blackwood arrived with Sheriff Cutter at his side, and Aldous Finch trailing uneasily behind, clearly less confident now than he had been when this scheme was still safely hidden behind altered ledgers and frightened clerks. "Your Honor," Blackwood began smoothly, "I understand certain parties have brought wild accusations before this hearing, but I would remind the court that the matter at hand is the disposition of stolen cattle and the safety of this county's grazing lands, nothing more." "I have read the petition, Colonel," Judge Marsh said dryly, "and I have also received, by way of Miss Whittaker here, a rather thick file of sworn testimony, a forged land record, and a letter in Land Commissioner Finch's own hand discussing payment for services rendered in amending that record. I intend to hear all of it before I rule on anything, and I would advise you, sir, that interrupting me a second time will not improve your position. Beatrice presented her evidence methodically, calling first Silas Prout, whose testimony, given now in open court rather than in frightened whispers, described the original attempt to steal the ledger and the subsequent pressure applied to alter it. She called Agnes Lindqvist, who described the driven cattle and the eastern boot prints found the following morning, and 3 other Elk Fork families who corroborated the timeline precisely. Finally, she presented Finch's letter itself, reading it aloud in full, watching the color drain steadily from both Finch's and Cutter's faces as the hall absorbed its contents. Ike Cobb, called to testify under judicial order, tried at first to claim the driven cattle had simply strayed, but crumbled under Judge Marsh's patient, relentless questioning until he admitted, in a voice gone small and defeated, that Blackwood had ordered the herd driven onto Elk Fork land specifically to manufacture cause for eviction. Blackwood, seeing his foreman's composure break, rose abruptly from his seat. "This is outrageous. I will not sit here and be accused by a foreman with no more sense than the cattle he drives, and a woman with a grudge against this entire county." "Sit down, Colonel," Judge Marsh said, not raising his voice at all, which somehow made the command land harder than shouting could have. "You will have your chance to answer these charges in a proper courtroom, before a jury, on charges of fraud and conspiracy that I intend to refer directly to the territorial prosecutor this same week. Sheriff Cutter, you are relieved of your office effective immediately, pending your own hearing on charges of corruption and obstruction. I will be recommending Warren Lawson be reappointed to fill the office until a proper election can be held, given his conduct throughout this entire affair has been, so far as this court can determine, honest to a fault." A murmur of surprise ran through the hall, followed by something Beatrice had not expected to hear directed her way in Wren's Crossing. Scattered applause, growing steadier as it spread, until even some of the men who had shouted loudest for her removal 2 weeks before were nodding grudging acknowledgment of what the hearing had revealed. Blackwood was led from the hall by the territorial marshal Judge Marsh had summoned in advance, his silver-topped cane left behind on the floor where it had fallen, unclaimed and forgotten, a small, undignified end for a man who had built his power on other people's silence. Finch went quietly, weeping in a manner that earned him no sympathy from anyone present. Cutter, for his part, said nothing at all, his face a study in the particular shame of a man who had known better and chosen wrong regardless. Afterward, in the cold, bright afternoon outside the hall, Judge Marsh found Warren among the crowd and pressed a familiar small brass star into his hand. "I understand this was taken from you unjustly," the judge said. "I would be obliged if you would wear it again, at least until this county holds a proper election and decides for itself who ought to keep it." Warren looked at the badge a long moment, turning it over in his palm the way he had the night he surrendered it, and then looked past the judge to where Beatrice stood watching, her face bright with cold and unshed tears, and something that looked to him very much like the beginning of a whole life he had not let himself imagine until 3 weeks before. "I am honored, Your Honor," he said, "and I will wear it if the county wants me to. But I find I have got another line of work calling to me just as loud these days, and I mean to give it its due besides." The winter that followed was, by every account in Wren's Crossing, the wettest anyone could remember after so dry a summer, as though the sky itself had been saving its rain for the moment the county's business was finally set right. The drought broke in a slow, steady soak that filled the creeks and swelled Willow Spring back to its old generous flow, and the irrigation ditches at Elk Fork ran full and unmolested for the first time in years. Beatrice's claim to Willow Spring was restored by formal county order within the month, the forged transfer voided, her father's original filing reinstated with a public correction printed, at Beatrice's own insistence, in the very newspaper that had once carried Blackwood's accusations against her. She wrote that correction herself, and took particular satisfaction in every line of it. Warren did wear the badge a while longer, long enough to see Cutter's replacement properly elected that spring, a steady, honest man named Otis Hale, the doctor's own brother, who had no love for the old ways of doing business in the county. But by the time the county fair rolled around in early summer, Warren had passed the star along willingly, having found, exactly as he told Judge Marsh he would, that another kind of work called to him louder. He and Beatrice built it together at Willow Spring itself, on the 160 acres her father had loved enough to die defending. A low, sturdy building of fresh-cut timber that served, on its western side, as a relay station for the Lawson stage line, offering fresh horses and hot meals to every traveler crossing the Cathlo Road, and on its eastern side, a small print shop and newspaper office, where Beatrice began publishing, twice monthly, a paper she called the Willow Spring Courier, dedicated, as her first editorial declared, to printing the truth even when it cost something to tell it. They were married in November. On the same week, Washington was admitted at last as a proper state rather than a territory, and the whole county turned out for the celebration that followed, filling Wren's Crossing's Main Street with music and bunting, and for once, no whispered talk of running anyone out of town. Agnes Lindqvist came down from Elk Fork with young Peter, grown sturdy again after his fever, and Silas Prout stood near the front of the small crowd gathered at Willow Spring for the ceremony itself, looking prouder than a man who had once trembled at his own front door had any right to look. Beatrice wore a simple dress of pale blue, her dark hair loose beneath a crown of late wildflowers that had bloomed unusually thick that autumn after so much rain. And when Warren took her hands before the traveling minister who had agreed to perform the ceremony, his voice was steady, but his eyes were not entirely dry. "I told you once," he said, quiet enough that it was meant only for her, though half the county strained to hear it anyway, that a thing you hand over yourself is not the same as a thing you lose. I handed over a badge for you, Beatrice, without a moment's regret, and I mean to hand over everything else I have got just as willingly, for as long as you will have me." "I will have you," she said, "for exactly that long and longer besides if the years are generous enough to give it to us." They kissed then, to the sound of genuine cheering rather than the ugly shouts of a town meeting gone wrong, and later that evening, as lanterns were lit against the early winter dark, and fiddles struck up a reel that sent half the guests spinning across the packed earth yard, Warren drew Beatrice briefly aside to the porch of their new building, where the stage line sign hung freshly painted beside the newspaper's own. LAWSON and WHITAKER, printed together in bold black letters that neither of them had needed to discuss twice. "Two names on one sign," Beatrice said, leaning into his shoulder as they watched the celebration below, the sound of Willow Spring running full and clear behind the building in the dark. "I do not believe I have ever seen anything so satisfying in my life." "Get used to it," Warren said, pressing a kiss to her temple, the warmth of the fire and the fiddle music and the woman beside him more than enough, finally, to fill every empty place a lost badge and a lonely road had once left behind in him. It is going to be there a long while yet. Below them, the rain that had saved the valley continued its steady, gentle fall against timber and creek and newly turned earth, and neither of them minded it one bit, not that night, nor any night that followed.